Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
It's time to stand up, speak out, get involved, and let's be intentional.
Hello and welcome to Intentional. I am your host, Mick Meow. It is really good to be with you on this Thursday. I hope that you are blessed beyond belief wherever you are. And thanks for jumping in, taking a little bit of time to be with us. Listen, if you're catching us live, please drop a comment in the chat. Let's go ahead and connect because we really appreciate you and we really are thankful for all the support that you have given to us. But before we get into it today, because it's almost time to be intentional, there is something really important that I want to share with you. Let's watch. Hey, I want to be real serious with you. One of the biggest scourges caused by the open border crisis is the flow of uncontrolled fentanyl. 70% of last year's overdose deaths were attributed to fentanyl. It is 100 times more potent than morphine. 2 grains can and will kill you. At the fentanyl test, they have created the first test that can detect deadly fentanyl down to 1 nanogram per milliliter because every life is precious. Go to thefentanyltest.com and use promo code MEOW for your 10% discount off your order today. Yep. It is that time. So let's be intentional, folks. Today, we're going to delve into a topic that may be a little bit difficult for people to hear, but it has to be addressed. When hospice becomes euthanasia. And let's add to that it is unbeknownst to the family and loved ones. Now, it's true that assisted suicide and euthanasia has become legalized in countries like Canada, Australia, Spain, Belgium. But here in the United States, there are 11 states that have legalized assisted suicide. And according to a group called Death with Dignity, there are 18 more states that are considering bills this year, 2025, considering bills to put this practice into place, probably in a state right near you. So hospice is supposed to be when medical treatment can no longer cure a disease. Then the hospice professionals can do many things to control pain, reduce anxiety. They offer spiritual, emotional support, and improve, here's the kicker, improve quality of life for terminally ill people so that they can have more time to spend with their families. Now, however, what about when there are drug cocktails that are being administered and there's denial of nutrition and hydration that hastens death and artificially terminates that life, the life of a human being, a precious living soul created by God, again, unbeknownst to the family and the loved ones. So today we are honored to have Marcia Joyner with us. Marcia lost her mom to hospice murder in Georgia back in June of 2017. She wrote the book Betrayed by Hospice and Healthcare to hopefully save other people and their loved ones from having this tragedy. And her passion is really to protect people, especially those who are the most vulnerable, the elderly and the disabled. She also has a Facebook group that is titled Murdered by Hospice. So I want everyone to please welcome with me Marcia Joyner. Hello, Marcia. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much. I loved your introduction. Um, you could be saying the same thing I'm saying. It was an excellent, excellent introduction. Everything that you're saying is true about the euthanasia and about hospice and about the toxic drugs that they're using. So I appreciate you letting me come on to the program, not only to talk about my book, but to tell you my story, why I started writing the book. And as you stated, I lost my mom in June of 2017. So in just a couple of weeks, it will be 8 years that I lost her. And
Oh,
not a day goes by that I don't remember exactly what happened. So hospice says there are certain criteria in order for you to be enrolled into that. And my mom met that because she had congestive heart failure. That's treatable by medication. It doesn't mean you're dying. You could live 5 to 10 years with it. My mom was living with it. And the only other thing she had besides congestive heart failure was a left hip that did not have any cartilage, and she could not go under surgery to have it repaired because of the congestive heart failure, per her doctor. So one time when I was down there, she lived in Georgia. I am 3 states away. And when I was down there, she became anemic, is what we thought. She was a little bit dizzy. So her doctor said, take her to the hospital. She goes to the hospital and they want to find out why, she's bleeding internally. So they do an endoscopy and a colonoscopy. So to tell you about my mom, I was very upset because I was afraid for her to go under because she might not come out. So she said to the doctor, if my daughter is going to be concerned about this, if it's going to upset her, then I'm not going to do it, because she was more worried about me than she was about herself. But I acquiesced because that's what she wanted. They didn't find anything, no cancer, nothing else. But then the doctor comes forward and says, hey, she qualifies for hospice because of the congestive heart failure. My
right.
dad at that particular hospice had been the hospice chaplain for 15 years, 10 years earlier. So when they recommended hospice, we thought mom would be safe. They knew how much my dad loved her and they would not do anything to hurt her. And all the years that my dad was a hospice chaplain, he never said anything about people dying prematurely or any question about it. My dad was a very godly man and he would have never been any part to that. So we
Wow.
thought she was safe. She enrolled in November. And in late December, I received a phone call from them saying that she had fallen and they wanted her to be in a hospital bed there, take it to the house. And I said, she would give up if you did that. She likes to sit up and, she talks to people. She's on the phone with her friends, people from church. Um, we had a healthcare person who came in that we paid privately, and they would sit and watch Pioneer Woman and recipes. So she was a very astute lady, Southern Belle. So putting her in a hospital bed was not going to be the answer. And I want to say about getting medical records, because when I later got the medical records, they said to me, or they had put in the medical records, that daughter never called us back. Well, when the hospice people called and asked me about putting her in a hospital bed, I said she would give up. My parents said no. That to me was the end of discussion. But to them, because my parents are elderly, they obviously were not supposed to be making their own decisions. So if I didn't call them back and say that, then I was being negligent as a daughter.
Mm.
So my mom, a couple of months later, her doctor recertified her for hospice because she had been on it more than 6 months. She's recertified. He goes to India for 3 weeks. The hospice nurse from who knew my dad comes to the house and says, "We're taking you to respite care." They didn't ask. My mom never said she needed to go. They just came in and took her to respite care and took my dad, put my dad in
Wow.
a room across the hall from my mom, and they immediately started drugging her. Within 2 days, I called, every day to talk to my mom under normal circumstances. And so I called there and she didn't answer. And my dad said, "She's sleeping all the time and she's not even staying awake to take her pills." That was an alarm to me. So when they had originally told me that they were going to the hospice facility, my family was ill at the time and I couldn't travel down. It's a 13-hour trip. So as soon as I could, I went down. But my sister and I told them to stop giving her Ativan and morphine because they told us that's what they were giving her. I knew about morphine. I didn't know about Ativan, but they said she was on a fentanyl patch, which you talked about in your opening. And fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine, 50 times stronger than heroin. And that's what they were giving my mom. But because she had received prior to that lidoderm patch for her hip, I didn't think anything about it. I should have, and I should have researched then. And that's why I say research, do not trust what you're being told. I did. It cost my mother her life. So time went on. I went down there, and my mom at that point was in a coma. And there's nothing that I could do but say, "Take her to the hospital. That's what we need to do." They said if we take her to the hospital, she would die from drowning. You don't want your mom to die like that, do you, sweetie? That's a terrible way to die. They're smarmy, they lie, they manipulate. And that's what they did to us. We watched my mom go into this coma and die. And in spite of us trying to get her to the hospital, they refused. When they came to put a second 50 microgram patch on my mom, I said, don't put that on. I'm, grasping at straws. "If we don't do that, sweetie, she will go into withdrawals and she'll be in a great deal of pain. And you don't want that, do you?" Again, they
Mm.
manipulate. They are literally trained how to manipulate. My
Mm.
mom lost the battle on June the 20th.
Mm.
Accepting that was not something that I could do at that time. And now, 8 years later, I'm still not accepting that. So I started doing research, looking to find out what had happened. Was this unique because my dad was a hospice chaplain, or was it happening to other people? And I found Ron Panzer, who was a nurse, a hospice nurse, and he had a site called Hospice Patients Alliance, where he had blown the whistle in 1998 and said hospice is killing people. It didn't change anything. It's 1998 to now. We're still in that same boat, except it's happening more frequently across. You don't need to go and have that is my mother right there. The lady in
Oh.
is my mother. I want to say that the gentleman on the right, Alan Eisner, is Liz Eisner's husband, and she is the founder of the Facebook group Murdered by Hospice.
Wow.
So when I joined it, I was number 140. We're now at 5,700 people. Mostly
Oh.
those are victims that have lost loved ones.
And we're going to be scrolling those pictures just so people know. We want to show the pictures of the people who have been impacted. And so as I just want people to understand that's who these pictures are of people who have died under the care of hospice or euthanized under the disguise of hospice.
Also, these people that she's showing now are ones whose story are in the book, The Betrayed by Hospice and Healthcare Stories from the Deathbed, which truly is from the deathbed. All of these people died because they trusted hospice.
You
So
know, oh, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, you know what this sounds like, Marcia? This is hauntingly reminding me of the hospice, not the hospice, the COVID hospital protocol deaths, which I feature many of them on my show, but they had that similar feel. It sounds like there was a lack of informed consent. They're being given tons of sedating medications. All of it is being done without the knowledge of the family and the loved ones.
That's exactly right. And when you talk about, we just had somebody that came on today that was kind of blasting us and saying that we just, want our loved ones to suffer and we shouldn't be that way. And it's cruel to make somebody suffer like that. Well, here's the thing. The people in these stories and the majority of the people, if not all, that are in this Murdered by Hospice Facebook group, their loved ones were not actively dying. A lot of them were not in pain. They did not go into hospice and say, I want to die, kill me. They never said that. The drugs, morphine, Ativan, Haldol, Seroquel, fentanyl, whatever was given to them, they did not consent to that. Nobody asked them, we're going to give you this drug and you're not going to really be able to talk to your family anymore. So we just want you to know that this is what's going to happen. These are the side effects. You might be nauseous. They do cause constipation. It might make you nervous. You could hallucinate with it. It can cause depressed respiratory. And what they talk about is take morphine because it'll help you breathe. Well, a small dose of morphine is true. It will help some people breathe. That is one of the reasons that they have that. The problem is when they start in hospice, they give them that, and it's the same dose as they give somebody else who is not opioid naive. And a lot of these people were allergic to morphine. It is stated in the book that they were allergic to it, and they still gave them the same amount they would give someone else. Morphine causes anxiety. So they cause anxiety. Then they can give them Ativan, which is the same thing as lorazepam. And a lot of times when I got my mom's medical records, which is so important to get that, and it said that they gave Roxanol. And I was like, what is Roxanol? Roxanol is morphine. If you don't research and you don't know that, you assume it's two different drugs and you've never heard of Roxanol, so it doesn't cause any alarms. And Ativan is lorazepam. So again, if you don't know what those drugs are, you're not going to be alarmed by it. Fentanyl is, my mind is Duragesic, and fentanyl and Duragesic are the same thing. Fentanyl is measured in micrograms instead of milligrams because of its strength, as Mick was saying earlier about fentanyl in her opening. So these, once I did my program, I told my mom's story on Marty Oakley, TS Net Radio Network, which has gone out of business January of this year. And after that, she said, I want you to come on and be a host and talk about hospice because people don't know what's going on. And I did that for 6 years. So coming on to your program, Mick, I appreciate it because it is a different audience. And my entire goal, my passion in life is to advocate for the elderly and the vulnerable. And I started writing this book in February of 2024, and I finished it in March of 2025. Not because I'm really slow, but I wanted to get all of the stories right. There are 34 stories in this book, and I wanted to personalize them. These are real people. These people lived a life, their families loved them, and they were not ready to die. They were not actively dying, which is what hospice was created for, people that are actively dying and to minimize pain.
And
right?
you led me exactly where I wanted to go because Hospice was really started for, I mean, I can remember, I'm a nurse, 28 years. Had hospice for comfort and compassion for the actively dying. It wasn't supposed to be euthanasia. And so, Marcia, here's my question. When did hospice care become hijacked by what we're calling, and I'm going to call, stealth euthanasia?
Well,
When did that
Ron
happen?
Panzer wrote a book called Stealth Euthanasia. And so in
Oh,
1998, he was blowing the whistle, right, on this.
yeah.
So we're going to go back as far as that. And there was a euthanasia society, and they didn't think that sounded really good. So they changed their names through time. And there is a chapter in the book that for hospice history, which lays everything out, the history, where did we go from here when we went to here? And people are saying that that's compassionate. That's killing somebody who's living their life. It's not compassionate. That is
No.
not compassion. And you will see in the book, and I hope you do go get the book, that there is a chapter in there on respite care, which is very near and dear to my heart because that's how my mom was murdered. And there are
Mm.
cases in there, um, one of them in particular, Wayne Kindred, when he went in the very first night and his wife was just going to get a little bit of rest and they talked her into it. It was kind of a manipulation. And the very first night that he's there, they gave him morphine and he became combative, which it can do. And this is a man who's opioid naive. And they gave him Ativan, they gave him Haldol. Now,
Oh,
those three words you'll hear a lot about in the stories, Haldol, Ativan, and morphine. And there are many nurse Facebook groups that have memes in there where they threaten to give a patient who is being combative or the family's not being, real nice to them or questioning them, they threaten to give them a ham sandwich, Haldol, Ativan, and morphine.
wow.
That
Yeah.
will put that person into a coma. They won't
I,
be able to
it
eat
put me
or
in a
drink.
coma.
Right, right. And they can't think, you can't function. And it causes more anxiety. And it's a horrible thing to do to somebody.
That's right.
And those drugs, I'm kind of skipping ahead, but if you look at the Beers list, BEERS, which is anybody can find that on the internet, and it says there are drugs, and there's hundreds of drugs in there that are not for somebody over the age of 65. They're considered
Mm,
elderly.
yeah.
However, you will see a sentence there that says, unless they're in hospice. So if they're in hospice, all bets are off. They can give them anything. It doesn't matter because they're dying anyway, right?
That's, and
No,
and the thing of it is that you are describing exactly what I would see in the hospital when we would have somebody who was elderly and opioid naive. They're not used to taking narcotics, and we would give them even small doses of morphine, if morphine is 4 milligrams and we would even give them zero point 0.5, they would just be buck wild crazy. So if you're giving morphine and Ativan and Haldol, that's just going to snow them down, or it's going to make them wild eyed and crazy. I mean, it doesn't bode well for them
no,
at all.
no,
At all.
no. And there are warnings. There are warnings on drugs.com. If you go to that site, then you can go in and you put in that name, um, lorazepam or Ativan, same thing, and morphine, and it will tell you that putting those two together is a bad idea, especially over somebody who's 65, especially someone who has dementia. It says don't do it. And they do it all the time in hospice. Now, you tell me how that can be compassionate. That's
Oh,
just cruel.
yeah. I'm in agreement with you, and I saw it for myself in the hospital. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, but I do want to ask you this because, and I'm just going to come out there because there's this organization. I'm not just picking on them. Death with Dignity. They want this policy reform. Marcia, they want every state to have an option for euthanasia, assisted suicide, for people that they say have terminal illnesses. But what they are sounding like and what it is doing is it sounds like it's just like something completely else. They just want like assisted suicide in all 50 states. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on driving this, because I saw this as well, and I'm going to talk more about this. We'll talk more about this in a minute. But do you think this is coming from a place of that they want to depopulate as a depopulation agenda? Is it ageism? Are they getting tons of money for this? Why the shift? Why are they all of a sudden just interested in just loading elderly people up, putting them in hospice, loading them with narcotics, and really sending them to their death?
Well, you follow the money. I mean,
Mm,
that's kind of the thing. So if you look at Medicare and Medicaid, and they're supposed to have oversights. The OIG is supposed to do oversight. CMS is supposed to oversight them. They're not. And they can see, you see cases, Bradley Harris in Frisco, Texas. They had a case where he was the CEO. It has nothing to do with medical. You don't have to be a medical professional to open up a hospice facility. And he was making hand over fist money on innocent people. And he had doctors that were working for him that he would give bonuses to sign them up, because there is a lot of money in hospice. And, if you don't have to do anything with them, you just have one or two nurses there and you're giving them a chemical restraint. And so they're just laying in the bed until you give them the kill shot. Then there's not a whole lot you have to do for them, right? So he had a nurse, Jessica Love was the name of the nurse. It's a strange name to have the name of Love, but that was her name. And he would send her text messages and say, "This person's living too long, do something about it." And she would brag that by the end of her shift, she would turn them on their left side, give them a little bit more morphine, and they would be gone before her shift was over. It was some kind of pride that she took in that. He would send text messages, "Find me somebody," and make them go bye-bye. He was blatant about it. Well, fortunately, he and his 12 other cohorts were found out, and they are spending together 64 years in federal prison.
well, thank
But they're
God.
in prison for fraud, for Medicare fraud, not for
Not for
murder,
murder.
but for fraud, because the government wants their money and they didn't appreciate somebody stealing the money. It's not about humanity, it's about money. And I have people
Mm,
that ask me, and you'll have to stop me, Mick, because I get on a roll. And so anytime,
you're
just
fine. You're
raise your hand and stop me. But anytime that somebody goes in, if people say, "Well, why would they kill them? They're making money off of them. Why would they kill them? That's just stupid. You're just making this up." No, I'm not. So I have a chapter in the book, and I put in there, "Here's my proof." And it's people like um, Bradley Harris, and there's several cases in California. I just saw one of them today, where they have hospices that they open up because there is a lot of money into it. And a person this year, it's almost $35,000 that hospice will pay for an individual. And there's an aggregate cap, is what it's called, by hospice. That is supposed to last about 6 months. And that's where you get your 6 months figure from. In my mom's case, I'll use that as an example. It was when I got her records, the Medicare records and Blue Cross Blue Shield records, after she was murdered. And I moved my dad up here with me. He was 89. And after I got the records and was looking at them, they paid about $3,000 every single month. And the month
Mm,
that they killed her was a little over 8,000. So if you add that together, and considering that it was about 32,000 at that time and now it's 35,000, there is a link, and I can send it to you afterwards, where there is a guy that's on there talking about the cap, the hospice cap. And he literally talks about you want to find somebody has a shorter length of stay in hospice so that you're getting your money quicker. Because if they die in 10
Ooh,
days, you still have that $32,000 and you can use that on another patient. So, say you have 10 beds
just like
and
the
you have,
hospital protocols.
yes,
Just like
and
the COVID hospital protocols.
right,
Sorry, it's golly.
roll through it. And he's very, I'll send that to you because it's shocking. It's shocking. I have it listed in the book, in one of the chapters, financial, hospice financial reasons. But he talks about if somebody else, if another hospice is getting shorter length of stay, meaning they live shorter time periods, then find out who their resources, find out who's recommending them, and then go to those doctors. And they do troll the hospitals. They will come in if you were in there because respiratory issues or you break bones, you are flagged. And after so many times, like 3 within that 6-month period, it's a red flag. You're called a frequent flyer, and hospice will be notified because the hospital does not want you on their record. Because if you come in, they treat you, you leave, you come back, they treat you, you leave, it goes against the hospital and
Yeah,
their rating
right.
system. So if they turn you over to hospice, the hospice that they are kind of contracted with, then that hospice gets the 34,000, 35, whatever it is for that fiscal year. And the hospital doesn't have to worry about you coming back and taking from their resources. And then the hospice then gets that death on their side, which is a good thing for them. And if you don't think there's quotas, there is a book out there by Michelle Young Doers. It's called Killing for Profit, The Dark Side of Hospice.
Mm,
She was a
mm.
respiratory therapist for hospice, and she wrote the book after she was terminated because she was a whistleblower. So they do have quotas. It is about the money. So back to your question, they do this because there is a lot of money to be found in people dying.
Mm.
And there was a gentleman who had bought, and he said that you can make money off of people dying. But people didn't believe him when he first started his company with hospices. Today, the biggest hospice company is Vitas Hospice, Vitas Hospice. And if you go to their website, you will hear how wonderful hospice is because they obviously want you to come in and join, and they have so many hospices in the area. Do you know who owns that facility now, that hospice?
No. Who?
Roto-Rooter.
Oh my
I
goodness.
know, it's like a shock. Yes, Roto-Rooter.
Wow.
But they changed their name to Chemmed Core because it didn't sound good for Roto-Rooter to
Right.
own Vitas Hospices.
Wow. Wow. You know,
Yeah.
this is all so egregious, and I'm so grateful that you wrote the book and that you all have a Facebook page. I want to just tell you a little story, because I did work in the hospital for 28 years. I want to tell you what I saw. And because you actually tried to get someone to come in and do something, do an investigation and get some help into this. But I want to tell you, I worked for 28 years. I did oncology, I did cancer nursing, and I had a lot of patients. I was with a lot of patients, loved ones, where I provided end of life care. Over my course of 28 years, I hundreds, maybe thousands, I'm not sure, Marcia, but something that I witnessed, and it stuck in my head as I was going through and just reading about your book and reading about the Facebook page, and getting to see the resources that you have laid out. And this brought to mind, there was an order from a physician, and he would write this out: TOTT. I had no idea of what that was. too old to treat was the acronym.
Wow.
And then they would say to the nurses, okay, like, give them the cocktail of morphine and Ativan. They would order it. They would order like one dose of Ativan. Well, the Ativan came in a pre-filled injection syringe. It was 2 milligrams. And I was introduced to something called a short waist. I had no idea of what that was, when I was starting out in my career. The nurse would come up, they would have the syringe and they go, swish, swish. Oh, okay, there's my, they would order 1 milligram, but it'd come in just 2 milligrams, and they'd be like, wish, wish, there's my 1 milligram waste right there. So the patient would actually get 1.5 milligrams
Wow.
or 2 milligrams because there wouldn't be any waste there. And then they'd have this window give every 4 hours.
Right.
Well, you could go 30 minutes before or 30 minutes after in case you were busy. So people would be given it 3.5 hours. And so they would continue to do that early administration. Well, by the time you got to the end of your day, if you worked 12, 16 hours, whatever, that 30-minute time frame, you'd be back and way up. So it's not like they'd be getting it every 4 hours. It'd be like they'd be getting it every 2 hours. So
Right.
the reason I bring this up is because you sought assistance. You were looking for, intervention from law enforcement, the Joint Commission of Accreditation, a medical board, somebody. What happened? What occurred when you tried to get help and bring a light to this?
Nothing. Nothing. They will not investigate it. I went to, even before I left Georgia,
Excellent.
I was on the phone calling attorneys, and they all act really nice. Well, send us the information, and that sounds terrible, and send us, and I'd send pages and pages of documents. Let me back up and say, getting the medical records is crucial, and get it while your person's, if you do sign up for hospice, if you got manipulated into it, get the medical records. Make sure they don't give your loved one anything you don't approve of. Read about the drugs they're giving them. And if somebody's not in pain, which is the majority of the people that are these stories are written about, they were not in pain. So get the medical records. But when I sent this information to the attorney's office, in like a week or so, she came back. She goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but there's nothing we can do." And I'd call another attorney because I really thought I had something. I thought they were going to do something. I call a different attorney. I call another attorney. And everybody was like, was your mom working? And I said, no, my mom wasn't working. She was 87 years old. Well, then there is no loss of income. I said, there's a loss of life.
Life,
They said,
right.
I'm really
Yeah.
sorry. See if you can find somebody. Good luck, but there's nothing we can do. Finally, and I kept all this paperwork. Finally, one attorney said, it sounds like you've talked to many attorneys. Do you want to know why they won't take it? And I said, yeah, I would like to know. He said, because there's not enough money in it. He said,
Mm.
they wouldn't get any money for your mom. We would have to take it to court. Hospice has big pockets. They have mass mutual insurance. They will not settle out of court, and there's nothing we can do.
Mm.
So, and I was just dumbfounded, what do I do now? And then I found Ron Panzer, and I found Foundation Aiding the Elderly, and it's called the number 4, FATE, FATE.org. And I found Carol Herman. And this was after a year or so. And I talked to her, and she's in California, but she follows up to make sure that nursing homes and hospitals and hospice followed the proper protocol and they keep the patients safe. And I mean, she's a nonprofit group, always very busy, but she went after them like a bulldog and wrote an awesome letter to them, sent them the letter. And they said, oh, well, this happened too long ago. We don't even know, what's going on there. And we're not going to investigate it. And she said, I told you she was a bulldog. She said, you don't get to tell me no. She
Oh,
said,
good
these
for
are
you.
regulatory requirements. Exactly. These are regulatory requirements, and you have to respond. Well, they responded and they said, yeah, you know, we either did or didn't go into the physical place, and we maybe we talked to somebody, but there's nothing to see here. Her mom was kept safe. They didn't do anything wrong. Well, and this was a couple of years, but like a couple of months after my dad moved in with us, with my husband and me, we got a letter from Capra, and they wanted to know, how did the hospice do? What's your opinion about it? What kind of rating do you give it? I gave it a
Mm.
1 because I couldn't give it a 0. And they gave you, at the last, say whatever you want to say about it. Here's the extra space to write on. And I wrote a brief description. They didn't keep her safe. They gave her Ativan, morphine, and fentanyl. They put her into a coma. They wouldn't let us take her to the hospital. Never heard back from them. KEPRO, KEPRO, is another organization that is supposed to look into, investigate hospice. Same thing. They didn't even have time to review the records till I received a certified letter back that said, we see nothing wrong that they did. And that was by a hospice doctor that looked at it.
Oh,
So I
sure.
said, then I want you to talk to a non-hospice doctor. Again, within less time to review it, they came back and said they kept my mother safe. This was the proper protocol, and they followed the guidelines. And I
Mm.
said, well, obviously, you have very low standards because my mom was murdered. I don't care what you say. I know she was murdered. So those are
Right.
the legal avenues that you're supposed to go through. I notified the medical director when he came back from his 3-week trip to India, and he knew my mom. And when he came back, I told him about this one nurse telling us that she had to put that second patch on. And he said, no, she didn't. And I said, well,
Hmm.
that's what your nurse told us. And he just kind of looked at me, and he knew I knew. And I don't personally hold him responsible because I don't think he would have done that to my mother. But because he's the medical director of that facility, he's got to be doing it to other people. And my mom just got caught in a situation because he was in India. I had met him before. I don't think he would have done that to her because I think he would have known better. I hate to say that, but because we had talked so much and he knew how much we all loved my mom. So I don't think he was complicit, but he's,
But he still should have investigated. He he
yes.
he should have done something. He should have, had that nurse, and start looking through her chart. I mean, that's what used to
Mhm.
get me. I mean, I used to manage outpatient infusions, and that was the words out of my mouth, Marcia, was that if I ever heard or found anybody who was doing the short waist or the whatever, to enhance somebody's departure, somebody's
Mhm.
death, then that was it. You can consider yourself being turned into
Out.
the board. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there are cases which you read the book, and you will see in the book that there are several of the people that when the investigation was done after their loved one was murdered, they started looking into it, and several of the nurses have criminal records, and they're still nurses. And
Ooh,
they should not be nurses with a criminal record. But
ooh.
apparently that's very lax too in trying to make sure that someone is kept safe. There, elderly people are not considered worthy of being saved. And this, going to what you're talking about, assisted suicide, in Canada, it is legal. And they are even, people have been cases in there. Alex Schadenberg, he has Euthanasia Prevention Coalition in Canada, a very, very active group. And they are people that are deaf. There are cases, and I put them in the book, where people that were deaf wanted to die. The guy was, and
Mm.
he was a young gentleman. He wasn't a really old guy, but he said, I just don't want to be deaf, and I'm going to be a burden to my family. They they
Mm.
executed him. People that are depressed. One lady had lost her husband, lost her cat, and she was a little overweight. She was depressed, and they said she met the qualifications.
Oh,
What? How do you meet qualifications for those reasons. So
Right.
euthanizing people, assisted suicide has become just, it is a depopulation. What you said earlier, it's depopulation. And as
Right.
long as we have hospice in all states, I see no reason to have assisted suicide, medical aid in dying, whatever you want to call it. They're insulted by you calling it assisted suicide. Well, what else is it?
Oh, yeah.
And
Right.
people don't realize now, and that's a slippery slope because you can talk somebody else into, "Oh, you're a burden. You don't want to be a burden to your family anymore, do you? I mean, they've taken care of you and, their whole life is around you. They can't go on vacation because they're taking care of you. And you make that person feel guilty. And in the same respect, if you're the family and you're trying to keep your loved one alive, you're being very selfish. They've lived their life. They're ready to go. You just need to let them go. They're in pain and they're ready to go. You are being selfish by keeping them here.
Mm.
It's manipulation.
It
Look,
is.
as long as there's hope, as long as that person's breathing and there's hope and they're enjoying life, you have no right to try to encourage them to die. And these people in the stories and in the Facebook group did not want to die. I was telling you about Wayne Kindred. That first night he was there, when they got the medical records a week later, after he was dead, he was up on all fours, crying, saying, "I want to go home. I want to go home." They didn't
Mhm.
tell his wife that so that he could go home. Another case where Dale spilled coffee on himself. He was in an assisted living, but they had put him under hospice, and this was during COVID. Back to your point, Mick, they had
Yeah.
put him under hospice, but he was on the internet, had his own um, small, area in his little kitchen area, kitchenette. He was on the internet ordering from Amazon, and he spilled coffee on himself. His son couldn't come help him get the coffee off. They called to see if hospice would come and give him a shower. And they said, "We don't have anybody to do that, but we can come pick you up and bring you to the hospice facility
Oh,
and we'll give you a shower." Right? So his daughter in law was like, "No, no, no," because her mother in law had died several years earlier by going to the hospice respite facility for a tune up, is what they told her. And she
uh-oh.
died. Well, and that she died within 5 hours. The next day, she was dead. When they came to visit her, they said she got very upset overnight. She became combative, and they had to give her some Ativan and they gave her morphine. So
Oh,
Dale, years later, now Dale's in there because he wants to get the coffee off of him and get them give him a shower. They overdosed him. He died
oh
days
my.
later and never did get a shower. It
That
is
is,
manipulation.
yeah. Absolutely, Marcia. This is horrific, and more people need to be aware of what's happening. I want everyone to go to Amazon. The book is called "Betrayed by Hospice and Healthcare: Stories from the Deathbed." I want to give you. We have a couple minutes. I do want you to have the last word. I want you to tell everyone, anything that they need to know, anything that is important for us to be able to share, website, any of that in the last few moments that we have, Marcia.
Sure, sure. In chapter 15, there is a chapter that has resources in it. It lists all the resources. But the one I was telling you about earlier, For Fate, and there is an excellent website called halovoice.com. That's HALO. And they have tons of information in there. We didn't talk about brain death and organ harvesting, but that is also another concern, and that affects the younger generation more so than the older because their organs are in better shape than ours are. And being an organ donor, you are not a cadaver if you are donating an organ. You are not dead. And there are cases where, in all cases, they give them a small amount to put them under, but not enough because then your organ is not viable enough. But they do give you paralytic, so you cannot move, when they have the scalpel there. They kill the person, taking your heart out or your liver or your lungs with a scalpel when you are not completely out of it, given enough morphine, is murder. And they will easily try to convince the family that the person is brain dead. They do an apnea test, which will take the oxygen away from the brain, which will cause it to swell. And Dr. Heidi Klessig has an awful lot of information on that, as well as Dr. Paul Byrne. There is a group called Legal Foundation, and they have a lot of information, and they can get pro-life attorneys for people in different states that if you contact them. Life Legal Defense Foundation is the name of that. And there's just a ton of information in the book. A friend of mine had said, who I respect, that I should just write the book with stories only. And I just felt like that you're just writing the stories. I mean, they're depressing, they're sad, and they're realistic, and they're real people. But if I don't give you information to save yourself, or if I don't give you enough information, the stories, I mean, they're depressing, they're sad, and they're realistic, and they're real people. But if I don't give you information to save yourself, or if I don't give you enough information so that you know why we are where we are today, then I feel like I'm doing an injustice. The book is 481 pages. It took me a year to write it, and I list the resources in there so that it's not just Marcia saying it. These are professionals, and there are links in there that you can go to try to save your loved one. If you're an organ donor, consider going to halovoice.org. They have a form, a little card thing that you can put in your wallet that says, I refuse to be an organ donor, to protect yourself about them telling you you're brain dead. So thank you. I go on a wild rant. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, totally. We're going to have you back because there's a lot to cover and we need to have more conversations. But Marcia, it was an honor. It was a great conversation. There's a ton to unpack. So we're going to have you back on so that we can dig more into this. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All you do, truly.
Thank you. Thank you.
You absolutely, and thank you. And I really want to say thank you to you all. We will see you next time. Remember, resistance, not futile, and blessings to you all, always.
Thank you very much.
It's time to stand up, speak out, get involved, and let's be intentional.